Debra Engle, author of Be the Light That You Are, and it's my great pleasure today to get to talk with Martha Beck, author, coach, life coach, spiritual teacher, and one of my favorite authors for a number of years. So thank you so much, Martha. Welcome.
Thank you, Debra. It's an honor to be here.
Well, I've been looking forward to this conversation because, as I say, you have been one of my favorites for quite some time. And your books have made a big difference for me personally. That's always good to hear, I know. And what I wanted to talk with you today about is a spiritual principle that I discuss in Be the Light That You Are. And that is the teaching that we think we've got millions and millions of problems, right? But when it comes down to it, we really just have one problem. And that's the teaching or the belief that we're separate. We're separate from ourselves, from one another, from spirit, from source energy. So I want to talk with you about that because I think it's such an interesting topic and one that you certainly have addressed in different ways in your work. So for anyone who's not familiar with you, I want to give you a full introduction here before we jump in. You are Dr. Martha Beck. You earned your BA, MA, and PhD, all from Harvard, all in the social sciences. You've published several New York Times bestsellers, as well as 150 magazine articles. I know you've been a columnist for O Magazine for many years. And you are, in the words of USA Today, one of the best-known life coaches in America. You spend part of each year in Africa leading seminars where you donate the proceeds to ecosystem restoration and education for rural Africans, which is phenomenal. And then I love this. Your dream, your fondest dream, is to help save the world while wearing pajamas. And I have to tell you that I just laughed out loud because, yes, what a great dream that is. And I have to ask you about that first. Tell us more about saving the world while wearing pajamas.
Well, it sounds kind of silly, but it actually came from something that did not feel silly at the time. By the time I was about 18, I developed a lot of autoimmune diseases that caused a lot of chronic pain, and they weren't really curable. They were actually even hard to treat for symptoms. So I spent 12 years in almost constant pain. And I had to lie down whenever I could just to sort of cope with that. I basically raised my children on a king-size bed. I wrote my PhD dissertation on that same king-size bed. I spent a lot of time in bed, and not in a fun way. Even long after, what happened then was that I got into the system of living that I now teach to clients and to other coaches. And unexpectedly, all these incurable conditions got better. I got well. So now I'm fit as a fiddle, but I still think of everything as sort of focusing on the pajamas. So I also, when you're that broken and then you get fixed, and they said it couldn't be fixed, and yet here I am, I started to fantasize or envision, whatever you want, that if I were that broken and could be healed, then the world that is so broken might be healed as well. And that became my ambition. Like, I don't think I'll do it, but my intention is to die trying to make everything healthier than it is right now and to remain in my pajamas the entire time.
I love it. And it works. Obviously, it works. So there's something about that comfort level, and I think, honestly, it's to this topic that we're talking about where, we think that we're separate from one another, or we build separation out of fear. And what you were doing was really relaxing into the space with your kids and with your life situation and finding connection instead. So I think that's the key, really, is in talking about this issue of one problem, one solution. That one solution really is connection. And you have helped literally millions of people find that connection. One of the books that I love is about finding your inner guidance system through your Northstar. So can you talk a little bit about why it's so important for us to connect with ourselves, but also with one another in finding answers to our problems?
Sure. Well, I know you talk a lot in your book about issues like conformity to culture and how that gets in the way of our experiencing our essential nature as it really is when we aren't surrounded by social cues. So the book you're talking about, Finding Your Own North Star, is about thinking of yourself as having two sides. One I call the social self, and it exists to help you survive by fitting in. And the other I call your essential self, and that's just who you would be because of your genes, no matter where you live, no matter what culture raised you. And because I was so sick, and then I had a child with Down syndrome who also didn't fit into the cultural model. I mean, here I was trying to get a doctorate from Harvard after being there since I was 17. And my body didn't work, and my son had a cognitive disability. There was no way for me to fit in with my culture. So instead, I started going toward my essence and trying to figure out what my life was worth, what my son's life was worth, and what anyone's life is worth. And when you're in pain and you're in sorrow and you don't fit in, the place you have to go is within. And the one thing I could learn and master while I was in all that pain for 12 years was meditation, essentially, looking inward and trying to find the truth, any kind of truth that would comfort, which is what your book is all about. And when you reach that point incredibly deep within you, you find out that what is most personal is most general. And that when I looked inward for my essence and then did what my essence loved, things started getting better for me, even though I was bucking the cultural tide. And then later I just learned to live that way because it physically hurt if I didn't. And then later when I was teaching business school, my students started asking me about my whole philosophy of life, and I started talking to them about it outside of class. And that's how I started doing this coaching stuff. And that's why I wrote Finding Your Own North Star. So I hope it's a very optimistic book, but it came out of a sense of being very, very out of options.
And it seems like often that is the time when we start to look within, when it seems like there is no other option. So finally, we've got to take that journey inside ourselves. So I think it's really interesting, what you're saying about the cultures or the communities where we don't fit. I'm guessing probably everyone has felt that at some time or another. You've also written about communities where there can be a lot of oppression, where there's really a high sense of expectation that everyone's going to conform, and that there's a lot of guilt and shame that's heaped on people if they don't conform, if they don't fit in. So for people who may be watching this and maybe feeling like, yeah, that's me, I'm in this,
but only always.
Me, yeah. What would you say to that person? What's the first thing that could help them break out?
First of all, I'm going to quote the good book where Jesus said, "What profiteth it a man or a person if they should gain the whole world and lose their own soul?" When it comes to all cultures come to a place where they do not serve an individual's deepest self. They are a generalization, cultures are, and they're created sort of by happenstance, by people who aren't all that sure what they're doing. So we always end up, if we follow our truth long enough, we are going to find departure points where our truth doesn't match our culture. And at that point, we are subjected to a tremendous amount of pressure to go back to the way the culture prescribes behavior. And shaming is the primary way. When I taught sociology, I used to have my students go out and do two things. One was to break a small law, like jaywalking. And the other one was to break a norm that is shamed by the culture. So I had one woman who was a brilliant student. She went home for Thanksgiving and ate her entire Thanksgiving dinner with her hands. She didn't use the cutlery at all. And like these kids, these 18-year-old college students were doing things that were bucking the tide of culture. And what they found, what we'll all find, is that we all break little laws. We go 5 miles over the speed limit, or, we don't quite stop at a stop sign because the law is easier to break than a norm. Nobody's going to shame us for it. So unless you get very resilient within yourself, shame is the most powerful force in your life. And it is specifically the factor that separates, or that appears to separate us. Because you're absolutely right. None of us is actually separate. But shame is the driver that says you are alone, you are separate, nobody's like you, and nobody likes you. If you can tolerate that in service of what your heart and soul need to thrive, you will get past it. And you will go into a space I'm going to quote Jesus again. Nobody talks about how he said, anybody who will not leave father and mother to follow me is not worthy of me. And if you do follow me, and he's talking about the truth, the way, the light, if you do follow that, you will have 100 times mothers and fathers and sons and daughters. You will be given so much if you can handle that initial break from culture. And just maybe you'll pull other people that you love along with you, and you'll all end up in a better place. That's my deepest hope.
So you're really talking about a pretty profound shift in perspective, aren't you? From the social side, looking outside of ourselves for answers and approval and love, and instead looking inside to that essential side of ourselves to find what we need there instead. And it seems as though it does take a lot of strength, especially for people who those first steps to break out of the norms, and to experience the shame and yet stay true to what's inside. For you personally, is there a story that you can share from your own experience where you could feel yourself really starting to take those steps despite the shame, despite anything that the world was trying to throw at you, to say, no, I'm going to be true to myself. I'm going to be true to my Northstar?
Well, a couple of times, and I tend to write a memoir whenever this happens to me. So my first memoir is about how my son was actually diagnosed with Down syndrome prenatally when I was almost 6 months pregnant, while I was getting my doctorate at Harvard. And my entire peer group and everyone I knew as an adult was a Harvard person. I didn't have a car. I didn't get out much. So the decision whether or not to continue the pregnancy, even though I'm pro-choice politically, to me it boiled down to what type of baby am I willing to love? What type of person am I willing to value? Because it wasn't do you not want a baby. It was what kind of baby, what kind of person is okay? And I thought, I could get hit by a bus and brain damage tomorrow, and then I would be saying I'm the one who's not okay. If I start eliminating people who are different from me, I pull the rug out from under my own feet and give myself no cultural context in which to be loved and valued if something wrong happens to me. To me, it felt like the right decision to continue the pregnancy, and I got a tremendous amount of pushback. A doctor told me it was like having malignant tumor and not letting him take it out. And then so I had this baby, felt very connected to something spiritual by that experience, and also very connected to the value of every individual. So then, ironically, I started being more religious, and I was raised Mormon. And as I pursued my own spiritual life, I first went deep. Everybody was pleased that I was being more spiritual in my origin. And then it actually went outside the bounds of Mormonism. And I thought, this religion is not right for me. And there were a lot of things that I thought were wrong in that culture. And so I left. And in Mormonism, that's the only sin you can commit worse than murder. So I literally would walk down the streets of my community and have people turn their backs and not look at me. My neighbors that I'd been friends with for years, because I was living in Utah when I left the Mormon church. So I went to Harvard to have a baby with Down syndrome, went back to Utah to leave the Mormon church. And people asked me for advice. But I was coming to a lived experience of the oneness that you write about. And I truly agree with your premise that is the single problem we really face, no matter what we think's going on. Once you are no longer separated from that force, which is everything, then the shaming can't take away the love in which you abide, because the love in which you abide comes from everything, including the people who are shaming you. And from that perspective, that is obvious. And you have to maintain it. It isn't easy. But in that space, truly, everything is on your side.
Beautiful. There's a line in A Course in Miracles where it talks about how for Jesus, really the only thing that he did that's different from all of the rest of us is that he listened only to God and to nothing else. So he wasn't listening to the shaming and the blaming. Certainly he was hearing it. He was acknowledging it. He was loving those who were blaming and shaming. But he was so tuned in to that North Star within himself, that connection to spirit, that's what he drew on That's what kept him
Yeah.
able, to do everything that he did. And so when he says we can do everything that he did and more, it seems as though that's one of the keys, for us to stay tuned into that spiritual connection into what's possible, who we truly are as the light of the world, instead of listening to all of those voices that say that we're broken or, that we've done something wrong.
Yeah.
I know in your coaching and your writing, you talk a lot about unhealed wounds. And, I think the stories that you just expressed about that come from expecting Adam and leaving the saints, there were all sorts of unhealed wounds within those, and yet you got to a place of healing with them. So why is it so important for people to address their unhealed wounds, and what really happens for them from a spiritual standpoint when they do start to address those?
What a good question. Right now I'm writing a book called The Integrity Cleanse, and it's about how integrity, it's exactly what you're saying, really, because the word integrity just means to be one thing. It's the same as the word integer, to just be a one whole thing, undivided. So when you come into total integrity with yourself, you also come into integrity with all that is, right? There are only two things that can move us away from our integrity, because integrity feels good. Everything we feel that is inherently what we yearn for. So peace, joy, love, a sense of being at home, all those things come from a state of being one, of being in integrity. So it's not for me a moral issue so much as just almost like a mechanical issue. Like if an airplane is in structural integrity, it works. If it falls out of integrity, it doesn't work. So it's simple. It's not a moral issue. Mm-hmm. So there are two things that push us away from our truth, our integrity. One is culture. We are simply taught to do things that are wrong for us. And the other is trauma. And I don't mean that as like war necessarily. I mean, certainly that counts. But anything that hurts us, shocks us, shames us, makes us recoil from the world, I'm calling a tiny trauma, right? If you are heavily socialized away from your integrity, you're going to go astray. The machine won't work. Your life will fall apart. If you leave culture, but you have a ton of trauma, you will still miss your truth, because the body-brain's reaction, the physical body and brain's reaction to trauma is to learn to avoid things, is to learn to be afraid. And that's a very concrete evolutionary thing that the body mind does. I do believe we are animals, and anyone who has a dog knows that, or a cat knows that if you hurt an animal, it learns to be afraid. We also have this additional layer of awareness that comes from our neocortex or from our ability to access God, or maybe they're both the same thing. I don't know. But we have the ability to understand that we have become afraid because of a trauma. And if we can teach ourselves that doesn't mean we have to avoid the world, if we can actually go into the experience that hurt us and start to investigate it and say, really, what's going on here? At that point, we begin to heal internally, and the body-mind comes into resonance with what I call the soul. At that point, we're in real integrity. When body, mind, heart, and soul are all singing the same song, as it were, then we experience total integrity. And then, without even trying, there is an experience of oneness with everything. Oneness, Jesus didn't just say we can all be like him. He said he and we are all one. We're already the same thing. It's all made of one thing. It's made of love. The world, including all of us, it's made of a consciousness that is love. So when you get in total integrity, when all the wounds are healed and all the cultural pressures are dealt with wisely, then kaboom, without even trying, your whole life lights up. I mean, I do this integrity cleanse thing, and when I do get moments of complete integrity, it's like the world is a miracle, and it's obvious. I can't even describe it. I can't even start. It's amazing. Just try it. It's amazing.
I love it. Yeah, it's that miracle that A Course in Miracles talks about. I think it's so interesting always to have different lenses to see these things through. But really what we're looking at are so many of the same things, and we're talking about the same things. So the idea that a miracle is really a change in perception. It's just seeing things differently. It's a natural occurrence of love. And I think of it as being exactly what you're describing as that integrity, that moment of just full alignment where everything changes. It seems like miraculously the world around us has changed when actually we're what changed, what's going on in our own minds and heart and soul.
Yeah.
So yep, lovely. Well, you use a lot of humor in your writing and in your coaching, and that's another thing that I've always admired about your work so much. Tell me a little bit just about the use of humor. For instance, if someone is in that space where they're feeling like they're not in integrity, can humor be a tool to help people get to that place?
I really think it can. In comedy, comedians say that comedy is pain plus time. And that's actually a very profound statement because it says that a source of great delight can come from our darkest moments if we process it correctly. If we not correctly, that sounds judgmental, but if we process it skillfully, it can actually become funny. I had an experience in the middle of the chaos I was talking about earlier between Adam's birth and my leaving the Mormon church, when I was in a surgery and I had an experience where a light appeared to me. I was fully conscious, even though I was anesthetized, and I wasn't feeling any physical pain, but I became aware of everything in the room and was looking around the room, which is strange because my eyes were taped shut. And then I saw a light, a small point of light, like a golf ball size, appearing above my head, and it grew. And as it grew, it filled everything. And it was I didn't tell anyone about it except my husband, for 20 years. It was the most exquisite thing I'd ever seen. And I can't tell you why. It just, wait till you see it. There's just no other way. And it grew and it filled my body. And this was at a time when I was dealing with, I was still grieving my son's disability and the trauma of trying to have him at Harvard. I was looking at the enormous grief of leaving my culture of origin and my entire huge family of origin. I was in a pretty scary place for me. And when the light touched me and filled my body, it immediately released all my fear and all my pain. And I was just in this absolute sweetness. I sort of felt like I went into it, like I rose out of my body into it and joined it. And at that point, I just started to laugh. And the light was laughing. We just laughed and laughed and laughed. I don't know how long it lasted, but the laughter, it feels like it's still echoing right now. Because what we were laughing about was that I thought this whole suffering thing was real. I really thought that I was separate. I really thought that life is nothing but suffering and then you die. And there's nothing that happens after that. And from the perspective of that light, that was hilarious. It was like when you hide your face and then you pop your face up, a baby will laugh and laugh and laugh. And I think they say it's because the baby thinks you're completely gone and then it sees you back again and it's a shock. I kind of beg to differ with developmental psychologists on this because I think the baby, it doesn't think you've left. It's like, how could something possibly be gone? For that moment that your face is hidden, the baby is in a dream world where people can be separated from each other. And when your face pops back up, then the baby is like in reality again. Oh, you haven't gone anywhere. Love has not gone anywhere. Love was right next to me all the time. I just couldn't see it. And the baby will laugh and laugh and laugh. That's the kind of laughter I was doing. It was the biggest game of peekaboo you can imagine. And then the light said, you're going to go through some tough times coming up here, but I'm always, always with you and with everyone. Always. Yeah, that's the thing I still rest in almost 30 years later.
What a beautiful story. And to have that sustaining moment to always go back to, again, it seems like that's the miracle, partly that it happened, but also just the change in perception, that you saw things differently from that moment on and saw all of this as a grand dream that we get to wake up from. So, for you, knowing that, that's so much a part of you now. If you could think of one thing that you wish everybody on the planet could know about who and what they really are, what would you say?
First, I just want to say that experience changed me, but it didn't make me unable to fall back into the nightmare. if my energy gets low enough, if I forget my truth, if I slide into cultural conformity when it's wrong for me, when I lose my integrity, the darkness closes again. And I have to go back, rewind, remember that, and rejigger everything for integrity. That's why I'm on an integrity cleanse. So what I would really like everyone in the world to know is that, it's what Eben Alexander wrote in his book, Proof of Heaven. He was a neurosurgeon who had an extended near-death experience after the whole surface of his brain was corroded. And he came back from that miraculously. But while he was gone, he had a whole big near-death experience. And he came back knowing 3 things. So I'm going to cheat and say 3 things. First thing is, you are infinitely loved. Absolutely infinitely loved. I don't care what you've done. I don't care who you are. You are infinitely loved. The second thing is, you are always safe. Nothing, including death, can endanger you. Nothing, not cultural shaming, not physical pain, not loss. Nothing is actually damaging to what is real. And the third thing is, you can't get this wrong. So if you're sitting there going, okay, fine, you've been meditating for 30 years, you got to have this white light and blah, blah, blah. What about me? I'm not you. What I would say to you is, you can't get this wrong. You can't get this wrong. Each of us follows a path that is perfect for us. And the parts that look imperfect are the most perfect, because they teach us how to come back into our integrity. And it's that leaving and finding the way back that makes us different when we leave this life than we were when we came into it. So I don't believe that this physical universe is ultimately as real as consciousness, as love. But I do believe that consciousness is playing in this physical reality to gain experiences, to gain compassion, to gain joy, to gain the capacity for delight at a level that it's never experienced before. And it's doing it as you and me and this computer and everything else that exists.
Beautiful. Oh, this is why I was so looking forward to talking with you. Just for that kind of insight and wisdom. So, well, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I just want to say good luck with the book. I hope everybody reads it. And more and more people are doing podcasts and broadcasts like this one and writing books like Debra's. And we're all waking up together.
And what a gift that is. Yeah, it's just exciting to see what so many voices that are coming forward these days with this message of love. So thank you so much for all of the ways that you've contributed to that message over the years, and that you can continue to do that. And for helping me out today, being here with me to have this interview and this conversation. So I invite everybody to go to Martha's website, marthabeck.com, to learn more about her life coaching, about her books, all of the things that she's doing. And for more information about Be the Light That You Are, you can go to my website, debraengle.com, for additional interviews and all sorts of information and goodies around that book and others as well. So Martha, again, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much.
And blessings to everyone. I just hope that you have a wonderful, loving day. Keep being the light that you are. Bye-bye.